People with genuine insight into football, people who are in the game right now and performing at the highest level, are telling us that the rest of Europe are fearing Arsenal. Now, I did a video the other day saying that Arsenal could win the Champions League. And yeah, a lot of you had things to say in the comments. We can address that towards the end of this video because I thought it was interesting. We can have a good back and forth about it. But if you're not going to take it from me that we have a real chance, take it from Roberto Martinez. He is the Portugal manager. He was the Belgian manager before. He's been in the Premier League. He's obviously done his thing in European football. But what's so interesting coming from him in particular is not just what he said, but the fact that he is someone who has a job as an international manager. His job is to be across what clubs are feeling and saying, what managers, agents, players are feeling and saying. He's got the time to dedicate towards where is the game going? What is the environment of football right now? And his hot take was that the rest of Europe is fearing Arsenal, that the rest of Europe is looking at them as something of a reference point, seeing them as incredibly dominant and saying the football they're playing and the way they're doing it, there are things that in Europe they're struggling to deal with that in the Premier League they might be more ready for. And I think it makes for a really, really interesting piece of insight, but also just a real compliment to the work that Mikel Arteta and Arsenal are doing. Now, I don't think Arteta ever built this side to be kind of Europe ready, to be a side that was destined to dominate in Europe. I think it was all about getting ahead of the curve of the Premier League. But in doing that, Europe might have been a little bit left behind in terms of tactically what the Premier League's trying to do. Now, look, the proof will be in the pudding, right? Because PSG played a brand of football that was so neat, on the ball, on the floor last season, and the whole of the Premier League couldn't live with it. Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City, Villa all fell at the hands of Luis Enrique's PSG at some point last season. So it's not to say that this kind of more turgid, set-piece based, defensive, off-the-ball brand of football in the Premier League is kind of the way to go to win in Europe. But it's interesting that Europe is seeing Arsenal, who are kind of spearheading a more pragmatic approach in the Premier League and have had success with it in Europe. It's interesting that other teams are looking at it and going, yeah, like maybe we don't quite have an answer for that right now. Now, look, you might think I'm doing too much. You honestly might do, and that's totally fair. Let me go through Martinez's comments, and then we can debate this in good faith. Excuse me for the slight sore throat. So, Martinez said on the overlap, when you look at it from the outside, everybody in the Champions League, all the top clubs in the Champions League, they are highlighting Arsenal. Gary said, so in Europe now, Arsenal is seen as the most dominant. To which Martinez replied, yes, because they beat Real Madrid the way they did, they're a team that can defend very well without the ball. They can play with the ball, it's a very complete team, and set plays, I know that in the UK it's different, everyone works set plays well, but in Europe, nobody can defend a corner from Arsenal, and that's a reality. When you look at Premier League teams against teams in Europe, the goals they score from dead ball situations is incredible. Now again, he's talking about the set plays, he's talking about Arsenal being a really complete team, he's talking about us beating Real Madrid, he's talking about the Premier League, but Arsenal being seen as something of a reference there. Now, I'm not surprised we've sent a bit of a message around Europe. We destroyed Real Madrid 3-0 and 1-2-1 at the Bernabeu. We destroyed Bayern Munich, Atletico Madrid, Inter Milan. These are 5 massive nights in Europe we've had. We even beat Luis Enrique's PSG in October, excuse me again, of 2024, which tells you that Arsenal have absolutely shown an ability, a capacity to be incredibly competitive in Europe and flex their muscle and allow their football to sort of overwhelm European opposition a little bit. Now, in the video I did earlier this week, I said that when you look at the way Spurs played and when you look at the weaknesses they showed in that game, it reminded me, or let's say the way we deployed our strengths against Spurs, it reminded me a lot of what we did to Atletico, Inter and Bayern Munich. That feeling of, off the ball being really, really good, passing through the middle because the lanes and the access was there a little bit better, destroying the fullbacks, ultimately being something of a nuisance off set pieces, though we didn't score against Spurs. It felt like the kind of performance we put in Europe. So that's why I kind of watched that Spurs game and I thought, wow. So even where we struggled against Brentford and Wolves, who played a very different game, a more Premier League battle-hardened game, when we faced Spurs, we were able to kind of turn it on quite quickly and play the kind of football that's had us success in Europe, which is why I felt that, yeah, we've got a really good chance in Europe. Dare I say, as good a chance as we have in the Premier League. And I think, basically, our chances in the Premier League are slightly lower than perhaps most optimistic fans are, Arsenal fans think they are. and my thoughts on what we can do in Europe are probably higher than what others think. Like basically, if it's people thinking we've got this good a chance in the Premier League and this good a chance in Europe, I see it as kind of more like this. And again, it's because of the football we play and because of a lot of what Martinez has said, that the brand of football, it being very complete, is something that the opposition are just struggling to deal with in Europe. But, you know, everyone, this is a real compliment to Arsenal and the work that Mikel Arteta is doing. This is a real compliment to, you know, how we've built this team, how we've sort of got ready for the future of football. Guillaume Balaguer has often talked about Arteta and Arsenal seen as like a model to kind of follow, an example of where the game's going. You know, I think after we beat Bayern Munich, lots of reports came out that Bayern were like, you know, internally, a lot of the reports were saying that Bayern looked at that defeat and went, okay, wow, that's kind of a bit of a wake-up call for, you know, what it's got to take and the level we've got to get to for as good as they have been this season. And it's a real compliment to the work we're doing. But you know what? Let's be balanced for a sec. Like, you know, obviously, it's incredibly complimentary words from Martinez. I went into the data about why I think, you know, we've got a really good chance. And for what it's worth, by the way, while a lot of people were really getting into me in the comments about that video saying, be humble, it's too soon, what a special fan base off the back of one result, you know, James, you've done too much, blah, blah. Look, at the risk of sounding a bit smug, and I appreciate I get many, many predictions wrong, you know, I've made videos saying Arsenal are going to explode off the back of like some, you know, nip and tuck games like Brighton or whatever, and we go and destroy Aston Villa 4-0. Like, I've made predictions throughout the season where I said after the Liverpool 0-0 draw at the Emirates, I think we're looking nervy. There's something about our passing I don't really like. Lo and behold, 7 games later, everyone's going, oh, Arsenal look nervy. They're giving the ball away easily. You know, sometimes, you know, you watch a game of football, you go into the data, it can tell you quite a lot, which is why I wanted to use the data to have a look at how ready we were for Europe. And in my opinion, it suggests we've got a good chance. We've got a good chance because there's certain data that matches up really nicely and our style is kind of ready to go. So a lot of people didn't like that video. I understand that. But from my perspective, like I've done with plenty of other videos this year, there is data there that I don't think can really be ignored and suggest that we've got a good chance. That's just how I feel about it. But while I've been looking at the data and having high hopes for Arsenal, and while I'm obviously flattered by what Martinez has said about my team and all that, I will say this. When I've watched the Champions League and I've seen it be won over the years, I've often highlighted individual quality coming through. A Ousmane Dembele. Obviously over the years we've talked about a Lionel Messi or whatever, but like players like Salah and Mane, players like Rodri and Haaland, who won it in previous years. Obviously, PSG last year. Who won it the year before? I can't quite remember. But like very rarely has a team won it without something of an outstanding attack. I mean, maybe Thomas Tuchel's Chelsea. I mean, with Havertz, Werner, Mount, I'm not sure they were seen as having kind of like an incredible attack. You know, Real Madrid, for example, Bellingham, Vinicius. Like, more often than not, there's something of a superstar there. And look, Thomas Tuchel's Chelsea are an example of a side that didn't necessarily have that, were pragmatism first. And yeah, that bodes well for us. That also suggests there's a good opportunity. I think when you look at managers like Ancelotti, Rafa Benitez, Thomas Tuchel, all having success in Europe over the years, it suggests that the pragmatic model can work. But again, there tends to be something of a superstar in there. And I'm not sure Arsenal have that in the attack. I think Saka's a superstar, but in terms of that form, you know, carrying us to wins over games, I'm not sure. And I worry that other teams' individual talent and kind of their superstars come to the fore, and over 2 legs that talent shows. I do worry about that. For the sake of balance, I do think that's something that levels the playing field. But I do really think that we've got a style of play that over 2 legs, the margins and the small things, the percentages should fall in your favour even more. And I think what Roberto Martinez has said here is incredibly complimentary of the work we're doing, but I think a really nice follow-up, obviously he didn't watch the Goonerverse, but it's a nice set of comments to follow up on from the video I did earlier in the week. And I'd love to know your thoughts on what Martinez has said on the fact that teams in Europe are looking at Arsenal as something of a reference, and that I don't know, the style of football we're playing and the way we're playing it is very, very respected. I'd love to know your thoughts on all that in the comment section below. And I thought it was worth covering here in this video. Anyway, yeah, let me know your thoughts. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. And obviously we'll be back with any reaction to the Champions League draw, probably on Goonerverse News as and when that breaks. I might go live tomorrow for it. I probably won't be able to. But yeah, we'll definitely do some reaction on Goonerverse News, so look out for that. All right, big thanks. Catch you in a bit.